Darth Vader returned to the upper levels of Moria, not as an intruder, but as its undisputed master. The cavernous, echoing silence that had followed the Balrog's demise was now replaced by a new sound, the skittering, terrified whispers of the goblin tribes. They had witnessed the mountain itself break at the Dark Warrior's command. The fiery demon they had both feared and worshipped for centuries was gone, replaced by a being of cold, silent, and infinitely more terrifying power. Chaos reigned. With the Balrog gone, and the great goblin a distant memory, the lesser chieftains and strongest brutes were locked in a savage, bloody struggle for dominance. They fought over scraps of territory in the endless warrens, their screeching challenges echoing through the vast, empty halls. It was the natural state of their kind, a constant churning anarchy of violence and petty ambition. Vader observed this chaos from the shadows of the 21st Hall, his presence a palpable weight of cold disapproval. This was inefficient, wasteful. An army of undisciplined rabble was no army at all. It was merely a resource waiting to be properly allocated. He did not offer them a choice. He did not parley. He strode into the heart of the largest ongoing brawl, where two hulking goblin champions were tearing each other apart, their followers cheering them on with guttural cries. His arrival was a sudden oppressive silence. The fighting stopped. All eyes, pale and wide in the gloom, turned to the black-armored giant. Vader pointed a gauntleted finger at the two champions, who were still panting, their crude blades dripping with black blood. "You are strong," his amplified voice boomed, the words an utter novelty in a place that had only known growls and shrieks. "But your strength is wasted on each other. It belongs to me." One of the champions, a creature of more muscle than sense, took this as a challenge. With a roar of defiance, it charged, its notched scimitar raised. Vader did not even ignite his lightsaber. He simply raised his hand, and the charging goblin was lifted into the air, its throat constricted by an invisible force. He held the creature suspended for a long, silent moment, forcing every other goblin in the hall to watch its struggles. Then, with a cold, economical clench of his fist, he snapped its neck and tossed the body aside. He turned his impassive helmet towards the second champion. "Any other challenges to my authority?" The second champion, a creature with a cunning, watchful intelligence in its yellow eyes, did something no goblin had done before. It dropped its weapon with a clatter, fell to its knees, and bowed its head. "No, Lord," the goblin rasped, its voice a mixture of terror and opportunism. "No challenge. We serve." Vader had found his lieutenant. This one, Gothmog, as it was called, understood power. It was a simple, brutal mind, but it could be shaped. It could be used. The purge was swift and merciless. Vader, guided by Gothmog, moved through the levels of Moria. Any chieftain who showed defiance was publicly and brutally executed. Any tribe that refused to bend the knee was exterminated to the last, their screams serving as a lesson to the others. Fear, Vader knew, was the most effective tool of governance. Within a week, the constant chaotic infighting of the Moria goblins had ceased. It was replaced by a single, unifying terror of their new Iron Lord. But fear was only the first step. Next came discipline. Vader gathered the goblins by the thousand in the vast, open spaces of the Dworodelf. He began to drill them. He was not teaching them to fight as individuals. He was teaching them to fight as a unit. He forced them to stand in ordered ranks, to march in step, to hold their shields in a locked, impenetrable wall. At first it was a near impossible task. The goblins were creatures of instinct, of cowardly charges and chaotic swarms. They broke ranks. They fought each other. They tried to flee. Each failure was met with swift, lethal punishment. Goblins who broke formation were force-choked and left hanging from the stone ceilings as a reminder. Those who failed to follow commands were cut down where they stood. Slowly, brutally, the lesson was learned. The chaotic rabble began to take the crude shape of an army. They learned the meaning of a shield wall. They learned to respond to the simple, guttural commands that Gothmog barked at them on Vader's behalf. They were still goblins, still cowardly and cruel at heart, but their nature was being hammered into a new, more useful shape on the anvil of Vader's unbending will. He was not just conquering them, he was reforging them. With the goblins cowed into a semblance of military order, Vader turned his attention to the true prize of Khazad Dûm, its forges. The great halls of the lower deeps were a testament to the lost genius of the dwarves. Vast, silent furnaces, colossal bellows powered by underground rivers, and networks of stone channels designed to move molten metal stood cold and dormant, coated in centuries of dust and despair. To Vader, this was not a tomb. It was a factory waiting to be brought online. His knowledge of engineering, of hyperdrives and cybernetics, was vastly beyond the simple smithcraft of this world, but the fundamental principles of heat, pressure, and metallurgy were universal. He did not need magic. He needed efficiency. He put his new legions to work. Guided by his commands, the goblins, under Gothmog's terrified supervision, cleared the ancient furnaces. They dredged the channels, repaired the great water wheels, and mined the rich veins of iron and lesser metals that still ran through the mountain's roots. Then Vader himself brought the forges back to life. He did not use kindling or bellows. He stood before the great cold heart of the central forge, a furnace the size of a small starship, and reached out with the force. He focused his rage, his pain, his cold, dark power into a single point. He compressed the air within the furnace, raising its temperature through pure telekinetic pressure. A dull red glow began to emanate from the forge's heart, then a brighter orange, and finally a brilliant white-hot incandescence. The forge was lit. A chain reaction of heat and ignited gases roared through the ancient flues, and for the first time in an age, the deeps of Moria were illuminated by the fires of industry. A cheer, thin and reedy, went up from the assembled goblins. It was not a cheer of joy, but of awe. They were witnessing a power that made the Balrog's fire seem like a flickering candle. With the forges lit, the age of industry began. Vader had no interest in the ornate, rune-etched artistry of the dwarves. He desired function, uniformity, mass production. He designed a new suit of armor for his soldiers. It was crude by his standards, but revolutionary for theirs. It was a suit of thick, overlapping iron plates, angled to deflect blows, with a simple face-concealing helmet. It was ugly, brutal, and easy to produce in vast numbers. He designed a new weapon, a short, thick-bladed sword, heavy and sharp, and a simple, sturdy pike. Every weapon was identical. Every suit of armor was interchangeable. He organized the forges into an assembly line. One group of goblins would smelt the ore, another would hammer the plates into shape over pre-made molds, a third would assemble the pieces, a fourth would sharpen the blades. It was a brutal, relentless process, driven by the crack of Gothmog's whip and the silent, ever-present threat of their Iron Lord. The goblins, who had only ever known how to craft crude, individualistic weapons, were now cogs in a great dark machine. They worked out of terror, but they worked with a speed and efficiency they had never known. The results were transformative. The skittering, leather-clad goblins were replaced by ranks of silent, black-armored soldiers. They were no longer a tribe. They were a legion. They were Vader's storm goblins. And the world outside took notice. From the highest, long-clogged chimneys on the peaks of Celebdil and Karadras, a new smoke began to rise. It was not the thin gray smoke of a campfire or the magical scentless vapor of an elven hearth. It was thick, black, and greasy, a column of industrial filth that stained the pristine mountain air. It billowed into the sky, a dark signal visible for 100 leagues in every direction. It was the proclamation of a new power in the heart of the misty mountains. The black smoke of Moria told the world that the mountain was no longer sleeping. It was awake, and it was working. The black smoke rising from the peaks of the misty mountains was a question mark written against the sky, and every power in Middle-earth had a different, fearful answer to it. In the golden wood of Lothlorien, the smoke was more than a sight. It was a stench, a psychic and physical violation. It carried the smell of burnt coal and hot iron, but it also carried the feeling of the will behind it, a cold, unfeeling industrial purpose that was anathema to the ancient living magic of the forest. Galadriel stood on the highest flet in Karas Galadon, her hand resting on the smooth silver bark of a Malarn tree. She did not need her mirror to see the truth. She could feel the change in the mountains as a jarring, discordant note in the music of the world. The fiery, chaotic evil of the Balrog was gone. In its place was this new presence, a darkness that did not want to corrupt or devour, but to pave over, to standardize, to control. It was the darkness of the factory, of the production line, of the numbered, faceless soldier. "Celeborn," she said, her voice a low, troubled whisper as her husband joined her. "The shadow in Moria has taken root. He is not merely dwelling there. He is building." Celeborn's face, usually serene, was grim. "The air is foul. It chokes the trees on our borders. Our patrols report new activity on the shores of the Mirrormere. Goblins, but not as we have known them. They move in ranks, clad in black iron." "He forges an army," Galadriel stated. "He turns the heart of the mountain into a furnace, and its inhabitants into his legion. Her mind went back to the brief, terrifying contact she had made with Vader's mind. She had seen the visions of his world, the star-destroying weapons, the planet-spanning cities, the endless legions of white armored soldiers. He was not just recreating a dark fortress, he was trying to build a microscopic, primitive version of the empire he had lost. "Our borders must be sealed," Celeborn declared. "The power of the Lady must be bent to shielding the wood. No goblin or orc must be allowed to set foot on the golden leaves of Lorien." Galadriel nodded, but her gaze was distant. A defensive shield was a temporary measure. A new Cold War had just begun on her very doorstep. Hundreds of leagues to the northeast, in the great bustling halls of the Lonely Mountain, the news arrived not as a feeling, but as a shouted report from a breathless scout. King Dain II, Ironfoot, Lord of the Iron Hills, and King under the mountain, sat on his throne, stroking his great forked beard as he listened. The scout, a hardy dwarf from one of the mountain watchtowers, spoke of the impossible, the black smoke rising from the lost kingdom of Khazad-dûm. A stunned, excited murmur went through the assembled dwarves. "Smoke from Moria, forges." "The Balrog," Dain began, his voice a low rumble. "What of Durin's bane?" "We do not know, my lord," the scout admitted, "but the smoke is not of its making. It is the smoke of 1,000 forges, working day and night. The goblins are silent. Their patrols no longer trouble the passes." The hall erupted in a cacophony of speculation. Was the Balrog dead? Had the goblins simply found a new, greater source of metal and were too busy to raid? Or had some new, unknown power come to the mountain? For the dwarves, this was a matter of profound, almost religious significance. Moria, Khazad-dûm, was their ancestral home, the greatest of their mansions, lost to them for an age. The hope of reclaiming it was a dream that burned in the heart of every dwarf, a story told to every child. "It is a sign," one old thane declared. "Durin's folk must return. The halls of our fathers must be reclaimed." But Dain, who had fought in the Battle of 5 Armies and knew the cost of rushing into a fight, was more cautious. "A sign of what?" he countered, his voice silencing the hall. "The Balrog was a foe we knew. This new power is a riddle. To send an army into Moria without knowing what awaits is to send them into a tomb." Hope, however, was a powerful current. The dream of Mithril, of the lost treasures of their people, of walking the great halls of Dwaro-Delph once more, was too strong to be denied. "Then we shall solve the riddle with a dwarven key, a strong axe and a stronger shield," a grim, powerful voice declared. It was Borin, a thane of the Iron Hills, a warrior renowned for his stubbornness and courage. "We cannot let this chance slip by. We must send a force, not to conquer, but to investigate, to see who or what has dared to light the fires of our home." The hall roared its approval. Dain, seeing the will of his people, relented. He sanctioned a war party, an expeditionary force, 500 of the finest, most heavily armored warriors from the Iron Hills, veterans of 100 battles against orcs and worse. Borin himself would lead them. Their mission was clear: march to Moria, enter the halls of their ancestors, and discover the nature of the Iron Lord who now ruled it. They marched with songs of returning and dreams of glory, utterly unaware that they were marching towards a form of warfare their race had never before encountered. In the Black Land, where the shadows were born, the great eye of Sauron perceived the change in the world with an irritated, analytical clarity. The disturbance in the Misty Mountains had been a persistent annoyance, a discordant note in his grand composition. First, the silencing of the Goblin Kingdom. Then, the embarrassing, inexplicable defeat of his chief servant, the Witch King. Now, this. The eye, wreathed in flame, turned its full attention from the hunt for the ring-bearer and focused on the distant, smoking peaks. He had felt the spirit of the Balrog, Durin's bane, a fellow Maiar of the old world, be extinguished. It was not a defeat in battle, a fading of power. It was a snuffing, an eradication, as if it had been crushed under an impossible weight. And now in its place was this cold, disciplined will, a mind that was actively, consciously shielding itself from his gaze. When Sauron pushed with his own immense consciousness, he did not feel the chaotic, fearful scramble of a lesser mind trying to hide. He felt a smooth, cold, impenetrable wall. It was a challenge, a declaration of sovereignty from a power that did not fear him. Sauron was a master of strategy, a being who had manipulated the fates of kingdoms and races for thousands of years. He was not prone to mindless rage. He saw the situation with a chilling, pragmatic logic. This new power, this Iron Lord as the terrified orc spies were calling him, was a threat, a significant one. It had established a fortress in a key strategic location, cutting off the primary route through the Misty Mountains. It was building an army, and its power was of an unknown and therefore dangerous nature. A direct assault would be costly, and its outcome uncertain. But Sauron, the deceiver, had other tools besides war. He saw a rival, yes, but he also saw a potential asset. This being was clearly a creature of darkness. It commanded goblins, it wielded a power that was not of the light, and it had a will to dominate. In many ways its goals seemed to align with his own. Perhaps it did not need to be destroyed. Perhaps it could be incorporated. A lesser lord, even a powerful one, might be tempted by an offer from the true Lord of the earth. A promise of dominion, of a shared victory over the hated men of the West and the fading elves. It was a tactic he had used to great effect on the kings of men, twisting their ambition to his own purpose. He would make an overture, a test. He would send an emissary to gauge this Iron Lord's strength, to probe his ambitions, and to offer him a place in the New World Order. A subordinate place, of course. There was only one true master. He summoned his most powerful mortal servant, not a Nazgul, for they were creatures of terror, not diplomacy. He called forth the mouth of Sauron. The emissary was a being of ancient terrible lineage, a man of the race of black Númenóreans who had entered the service of the Dark Lord in the Second Age. His humanity had been all but consumed by dark sorcery, leaving a being of pure, arrogant malice. His own name was forgotten, even to himself. He was only a vessel for his master's voice. "You will go to the Black Mountain of Khazad-dûm," Sauron's will commanded, the words burning in the emissary's mind. "You will seek an audience with its new master. You will bear my greetings." The mouth of Sauron bowed low, his masked face impassive. "And what is the message, my lord?" "The message is an offer of alliance," Sauron's thought continued, "laced with a deceiver's honeyed poison. Offer him dominion over all the lands west of the mountains, from the Grey Havens to the fords of Isen. He shall be my viceroy in the north, my strong right hand. His only duty will be to bend his knee to me, the true Lord of all Middle-earth, and to aid me in the recovery of the One Ring." It was an offer of immense power, a kingdom greater than any elf or man now possessed. But it came with the ironclad condition of servitude. "Observe him," Sauron commanded. "Feel the nature of his power. See if his ambition is a fire that can be controlled or a void that seeks to consume all. His response will tell me everything I need to know. It will tell me whether he is a future servant or a future slave." The mouth of Sauron departed from the Black Gate, bearing no army, only a small retinue of black armored guards and a banner bearing the symbol of the lidless eye. He was a messenger, a spy, and a test. The two greatest dark powers in Middle-earth were about to meet, not on a battlefield but in a contest of wills, a summit of shadows that would define the future of the war. The journey from the Iron Hills was long and arduous, but the dwarves were a hardy, determined people. They marched with a grim, rhythmic tread, their heavy iron boots ringing on the mountain passes. The hope of reclaiming their ancestral home was a fire in their hearts, a warmth against the biting winds. Their leader, Thane Borin, was a dwarf of few words and immense resolve, his face a mask of grim determination under his great iron-crested helmet. They arrived before the east gate of Moria, the Dimril Dale, in the pale light of a cold dawn. The sight that greeted them was one that brought both a surge of hope and a profound sense of unease. The hope came from what was missing. The valley, which for centuries had been a hunting ground for goblin patrols and prowling wargs, was silent and empty. The crude, spiked fortifications that had once littered the approaches to the gate were gone, torn down and cleared away. The great dark lake of the Mirrormere was still and beautiful, reflecting the snow-capped peaks above. The land felt clean, pacified. The unease came from what was new. The ancient gates of Khazad-dûm, though still sealed, were now flanked by two crudely but effectively constructed watchtowers of black stone. On the battlements above the gate, sentries moved with a steady, rhythmic patrol that was utterly unlike the chaotic scampering of goblins. And from the highest peaks, the columns of black industrial smoke continued to billow into the sky, a constant, ugly reminder of the new power within. "It seems the new master of Moria values a tidy doorstep," one of Borin's captains muttered, his hand resting on the pommel of his axe. "Aye," Borin growled, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the sentries. "And he values discipline. Look at them. They walk a set path. They turn in unison, Goblins do not move like that. The sentries were indeed goblins, but they were clad in the new black plate armor Vader had designed. They held their pikes upright, their posture rigid. They looked less like a goblin war party, and more like a grim parody of the royal guard of a great city. Boren, a veteran of 1,000 skirmishes, knew that discipline was a far greater threat than savagery. He would not be deterred. This was the gate to their home, their birthright. Hail! Boren's voice boomed across the valley, a sound like grinding stones. It was the ancient dwarven call of parley. I am Boren, Thane of the Iron Hills, kinsman of Dine, king under the mountain. I come to the gates of our fathers. By right of blood and stone, I demand entrance. For a long moment, there was no reply, only the echo of his own voice rolling back from the cliffs. Then, one of the sentries on the wall raised a horn to its lips and blew a short, sharp, ugly note. The great stone gates of Moria, which had not opened in centuries, began to move. With a deep, groaning sound, they swung inward, revealing not the dark, monster-haunted depths the dwarves expected, but a wide, torchlit tunnel. From the tunnel, a new sound emerged, the rhythmic, stamping tread of hundreds of iron-shod boots marching in perfect unison. A phalanx of storm goblins marched out to meet them. They were a terrifying sight. 200 strong, they were clad from head to toe in the new, black, functional plate armor. They carried tall, iron-banded shields and long, sharp-tipped pikes. They moved not as a horde but as a single, disciplined unit. They advanced to the edge of the causeway, halted as one, and formed a perfect, impenetrable shield wall, their pikes leveled, their faceless helmets staring silently at the dwarves. Behind them, a single, larger goblin emerged. It was Gothmog, now clad in a crude but effective suit of heavier plate, a symbol of his new station. He carried no weapon, only a black iron rod of office. The dwarves of the Iron Hills stared, their confident war songs dying in their throats. They had come expecting to fight a disorganized rabble of cowardly goblins. They had come prepared for a chaotic, swirling melee where their superior strength and skill would win the day. They were not prepared for this. This was not a goblin mob, this was a professional army. This was a wall of disciplined, silent death, a tactic of warfare they themselves had perfected, now being used against them by the most degenerate of creatures. Boren gripped his axe, his knuckles white. The hope of a simple reclamation of his homeland had just died. A new, far more dangerous war was about to begin. The fight for Moria would not be a cleansing, it would be a siege. While the dwarves stood in a tense, undecided standoff at the east gate, a different kind of meeting was taking place deep within the mountain. Darth Vader had agreed to grant an audience to the emissary from Mordor. He was intrigued. He had felt the approaching presence, a mind steeped in ancient malice and absolute servitude, and he wished to measure the nature of the power it represented. The chosen meeting place was the 21st Hall of the North End, a vast pillared cavern that had once been a great crossroads of the dwarf kingdom. Vader had made it his throne room. He did not sit on a throne of rock and bone like the Goblin King. He stood on a raised dais of polished black stone, flanked by two of his largest storm goblins, their pikes held at a perfect ceremonial angle. The hall was lit by the roaring fires of a dozen great forges, the air thick with heat and the clang of distant hammers. It was a hall of industry, of power, of a new dark order. The mouth of Sauron arrived, his black-robed retinue of guards following at a respectful distance. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face hidden behind a high spiked helmet that concealed all but his cruel, smiling mouth. His every movement was one of ancient, aristocratic arrogance. He stopped before the dais and surveyed the scene, his lips curled in a faint, condescending smirk. Goblins in uniform, forges, a pretender in black armor. "I am the mouth of Sauron," the emissary announced, his voice a sibilant, cultured whisper that carried an echo of ancient power. "I bring greetings and an offer from my master Sauron the Great, the true lord of the earth." Vader remained perfectly still, a silent, black monolith against the fiery backdrop of the forges. His rhythmic breathing was the only sound he made. He let the emissary wait, a simple, effective power play. The mouth of Sauron's smirk faltered slightly. He was not used to being ignored. "My master has taken notice of you, stranger," he continued, his tone hardening. "He acknowledges your recent accomplishments. You have cleansed this hovel of its lesser filth. You have proven your strength. Such strength should not be wasted in isolation." He spread his hands in a grand, magnanimous gesture. "My master is generous. He is prepared to offer you a place in the new order of the world." He offers you dominion. All the lands west of these mountains, from the frozen wastes of the north to the southern shores, shall be yours. You shall rule them as his viceroy. You will command his northern armies. You will be second only to the Lord of the Rings himself. It was a staggering offer, a kingdom, an army, a position of immense power. Vader's helmeted head tilted slightly, and in return, his amplified voice boomed, the simple question cutting through the emissary's flowery speech. In return, the mouth of Sauron said, his smile returning, "You will do as my master commands. You will bend your knee and swear fealty to the one true Lord. Your armies will march under his banner. Your power will be an instrument of his will. You will aid him in all things, chief among them the recovery of his lost treasure." Indeed, the emissary confirmed, he is its master, and all who serve him shall be rewarded when it is returned. Vader was silent for a long moment. He analyzed the offer, the being before him, and the master he served. He saw the familiar pattern, the promise of power in exchange for absolute loyalty, the demand for servitude disguised as a partnership. He had lived this life already, at the knee of Palpatine. He knew its every twist and turn, and he knew that Sauron, like his former master, would see any powerful servant not as an ally, but as a future rival to be discarded once their usefulness had ended. This Sauron was a powerful sorcerer, a being of great will, but he was also a coward. He hid in his tower, his essence bound to a single lost trinket, his power incomplete. He sent emissaries and servants to do his work. He was no emperor. He was a broken king, desperately trying to reclaim a lost glory. He was unworthy of Vader's respect, let alone his servitude. "Your master is a fool," Vader's voice declared, cold and absolute. "He is a relic, a shadow of a bygone age, clinging to a past he cannot reclaim. His power is a crutch, a single point of failure upon which his entire existence depends." The mouth of Sauron's face, what little was visible of it, contorted in a mask of shocked fury. You dare insult the Lord of the Black Land, the King of Men." Vader took a single menacing step forward, descending from the dais. "I dare more than that," he growled. He raised a gauntleted hand and pointed it at the emissary. "I see your master for what he is, a coward who hides behind an eye, afraid to face his enemies himself. He sends his wraiths, he sends his messengers, he sends his armies, but he does not come himself." He stopped, standing inches from the mouth of Sauron, his towering form eclipsing the emissary. "You will return to your master," Vader commanded, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You will tell him that the Lord of Moria serves no one. You will tell him that his offer is rejected, and you will tell him this: I too seek the ring, but when I find it, I will not be its servant, I will be its master, and then I will come for him. I will tear down his black tower, and I will extinguish his fiery eye, and I will show him the meaning of a true empire." The mouth of Sauron was speechless, paralyzed by the sheer blasphemous arrogance of the threat. He had come to offer a gilded cage and had been met with a declaration of total war. "Now get out of my mountain," Vader concluded. He turned his back on the emissary, a final, contemptuous dismissal. The mouth of Sauron, his face pale with a mixture of rage and a new unfamiliar fear, gathered his retinue and fled from the hall. The Summit of Shadows was over. The two Dark Lords of Middle-earth were now, officially, rivals, and the race for the One Ring had just gained a new, terrifyingly ambitious contender. Thane Borin of the Iron Hills was not a dwarf given to indecision. He saw the phalanx of disciplined goblins blocking the causeway to the east gate, and his blood began to boil. Goblins, the ancient, hated enemy of his people, aping the battle formations of his own race. It was an insult written in black iron. More than that, it was a blasphemy against the memory of his ancestors. This was the gate of Khazad-dûm, and no filth, no matter how well drilled, would deny him entrance. "They think a wall of shields and sharp sticks will stop the might of the Iron Hills?" Borin roared to his company, his voice echoing in the valley. "They have forgotten what dwarven steel tastes like. Sons of Durin, to me, we will give them a taste they won't forget." With a thunderous, earth-shaking cry of Baruch Khazad, Khazad Imenu, axes of the dwarves are upon you. The 500 warriors of the Iron Hills charged. They were a sight of terrible, beautiful power. Each dwarf was a living fortress, clad in the finest steel plate and mail, their beards braided and tucked into their belts. They moved as a single, unstoppable wedge of iron, their great double-headed axes held high. It was a charge that had broken armies of orcs and men for thousands of years. From the battlements above the gate, Darth Vader watched the charge begin. He observed it with the cold, analytical gaze of a general. He saw their strength, their courage, their superb equipment. He also saw their flaw. They were predictable. They were a hammer, and they saw every problem as a nail. "Hold the line," his amplified voice boomed down to his legions. "First rank, shields. Second and third ranks, pikes." The storm goblins, their minds gripped by a terror of their lord that was greater than their fear of the charging dwarves, obeyed instantly. The front ranks slammed their heavy shields into the ground, creating a solid, immovable wall of black iron. The ranks behind them leveled their long, sharp pikes, their points creating a dense, impenetrable forest of steel over the top of the shield wall. It was a classic, brutally effective anti-cavalry formation, a tactic Vader had seen used in 100 different forms across 100 different worlds. He knew the dwarven charge, for all its power was essentially a heavy infantry equivalent of a cavalry assault. The dwarven wedge hit the goblin shield wall. The impact was cataclysmic. The sound was a deafening shriek of steel on steel, the crunch of iron boots on stone, and the roar of the two armies colliding. The first line of dwarves, their axes swinging, shattered the crude shields of the goblins before them. But they could not break the formation. The goblin pikes did their grim work. The long, sharp-tipped weapons found the gaps in the dwarven armor at the throat, under the arms, at the joints of the knee. Dwarves, who had expected to carve their way through the enemy, found themselves impaled, their own forward momentum driving them deeper onto the forest of steel. The charge lost its momentum, stalling against the disciplined, unyielding wall of pikes and shields. The battle at the gate devolved into a brutal, grinding melee. The dwarves' superior strength and skill allowed them to win their individual fights, their axes cleaving through the goblins' new armor. But for every goblin that fell, another stepped forward to take its place. And the disciplined pike formation held, a meat grinder that was slowly but surely bleeding the dwarves dry. Boren was at the forefront of the battle, his own great axe a blur of motion. He was a whirlwind of death, his armor deflecting a dozen pike thrusts, his axe carving a bloody path into the goblin ranks. But he was fighting a tide. He looked back and saw his warriors bogged down, their charge broken, their numbers dwindling. "They are too many," one of his captains yelled. "We cannot break them." From the walls, Vader observed. Phase 1 was complete. The enemy's initial assault was contained. It was time for Phase 2. He gave a silent command, a simple telepathic push to Gothmog, who stood behind the main formation. Gothmog raised his black rod and gave a screeching order. From hidden murder holes and archer slits above and to the sides of the gate, new ranks of goblins appeared. They were not armed with pikes or swords. They were armed with crude but effective crossbows, another of Vader's innovations. A volley of iron-tipped bolts rained down on the stalled dwarven company. The crossbows lacked the power to penetrate the dwarves' heavy plate, but they found the weaker points. Bolts struck eyes, throats, and the unarmored backs of dwarves who had pushed too far into the enemy line. The volley was not designed to kill them all, but to sow chaos and disrupt their own shield wall. It worked. The dwarves, now taking fire from 3 sides, were thrown into confusion. This was the moment Vader had been waiting for. "Advance," he commanded. The goblin shield wall, which had been a static defensive formation, now began to move. In a single disciplined motion, they took a step forward, then another, their shields locked, their pikes jabbing. They began to push the dwarves back, driving them off the causeway, back into the open valley. Boren, his heart filled with a mixture of rage and bitter despair, saw the truth. They were not just being defeated, they were being tactically outmaneuvered. This was not a goblin rabble. This was an army, led by a mind of cold, ruthless genius. He had no choice. To continue the fight would be to see his entire company slaughtered. "Back!" Boren roared, the word a taste of ash in his mouth. "Back! Retreat! Form a line at the shore!" The dwarves, what was left of them, disengaged from the melee, their retreat covered by their bravest warriors. They left behind 100 of their kin, their bodies lying broken before the gates of their own home. They had come to reclaim their kingdom with axe and song. They retreated with a bloody, shocking, and unequivocal defeat. The Iron Lord of Moria had just proven that the ancient valor of the dwarves was no match for the cold, brutal mathematics of modern warfare. The defeat of the dwarves at the East Gate sent a clear and chilling message to the other powers of the world. The new master of Moria was not a mindless beast or a chaotic force. He was a strategist of terrifying capability, and his dominion was not to be challenged lightly. In the golden wood of Lothlorien, the news was received with a grim sense of validation. Galadriel had felt the cold, unbending will of the Iron Lord, and the dwarves' defeat was a predictable outcome of his tactical mind. The hope of a quick, heroic reclamation of Moria was a fool's dream. Now, they were faced with a new, permanent reality. A militarized, industrial kingdom of darkness had risen on their very border. The forest itself seemed to recoil from the presence of Moria. The golden leaves of the Malorn trees on the eastern edge of the wood began to lose their luster, their light dimmed by the foul air that now drifted from the mountains. The clear waters of the river Silverlode, which flowed from the Mirrormere, began to run dark, tainted with the slag and refuse from the mountain's rekindled forges. Galadriel and Celeborn responded by turning Lothlorien from a hidden sanctuary into a fortified bastion. The magical wards that had protected the wood, once a gentle, passive barrier against casual intrusion, were strengthened, becoming a shimmering, almost visible wall of elven power. The Galadrium, the guardians of the wood, no longer patrolled their borders with a quiet, unseen grace. They now stood in silent, grim watchtowers, their bows strung, their eyes fixed on the dark shores of the Mirrormere. Vader, in turn, recognized the power of the Golden Wood as a significant strategic factor. He had felt its light, its ancient serene energy, and knew it was a force his current army could not hope to breach. A direct assault was out of the question. For now, he established his own fortified perimeter. The west gate of Moria, which opened onto the Dimril Dale, was cleared and secured. His storm goblins, clad in their black iron, now patrolled the shores of the dark lake, their rhythmic, disciplined marching a stark, ugly contrast to the timeless beauty of the valley. They built crude but effective watchtowers of their own, their black stone structures a mockery of the graceful elven flets they could see across the woods. A silent, tense, and utterly cold war began. There were no battles, no skirmishes. There was only a constant, oppressive watchfulness. The elven patrols would see the torchlight of the goblin patrols, and the goblins would see the faint, ethereal glow of the elven lanterns. The two realms, one of living wood and ancient light, the other of cold stone and industrial fire, stared at each other across a narrow, unbridgeable gulf. Vader could feel the presence of the Lady of the Wood. Her mind, a star of immense power, was a constant, bright point on the edge of his senses. He knew she was watching him, feeling his own dark presence. He made no move against her, content for now to build his own strength, to consolidate his own power. He respected her power, but he saw her as a relic, a guardian of a dying world, a beautiful museum piece trying to hold back the tide of a new, more efficient age. Galadriel, in turn, felt him. He was a constant, cold pressure against the borders of her realm, a void of ambition and order that sought to quantify and control everything it touched. She had faced the darkness of Sauron for thousands of years, but that was a familiar evil. It was a darkness of fire, of shadow, of corruption. This was a darkness of the vacuum, of the machine, of the spreadsheet. It was a darkness that did not seek to twist the song of the world, but to silence it and replace it with the monotonous, rhythmic hum of a factory. The silent conflict was a war of attrition, fought with will and power instead of swords and arrows. The elves poured their magic into the health of the wood, trying to hold back the encroaching pollution. Vader poured his will into the forges, driving his legions to produce more armor, more weapons, turning the heart of the mountain into an ever-growing arsenal. The once beautiful valley of Azanul Bazar, the Dimril Dale, became a no-man's land, a militarized border between two irreconcilable powers. The age of myth was meeting the age of the machine, and the first front line of that silent, world-altering war was drawn between the Golden Wood and the Iron Mountain. In the Tower of Orthanc, Saruman the White was a caged animal. His gambit with the Uruk-hai emissaries had ended in their humiliating slaughter. His grand army, which he had sent to crush the kingdom of Rohan, had been shattered at Helm's Deep, its defeat aided by the same mysterious Green Knight, a figure his orc spies now reported was not in Rohan, but whose description was disturbingly similar to the new Lord of Moria. He was trapped. To the east, Rohan, though wounded, was now vigilant and under the sway of Gandalf. To the south, the shadow of Mordor grew, a power he had sought to ally with but also secretly supplant. And now, to the north, this new third power had arisen, the Iron Lord of Moria, a being who had dismissed him with the contempt one would show an irritating insect. Saruman's pride, the driving force of his entire being, was wounded almost to the point of madness. He, Saruman the White, the head of the Astari, the ringmaker, the master of 1,000 spells, was being treated as an irrelevance. But Saruman was a creature of intellect and cunning before all else. His rage was cold and calculating. If he could not be the strongest piece on the board, he would be the one who decided which of the stronger pieces would fall. He saw the new burgeoning rivalry between Moria and Mordor not as a threat, but as the ultimate opportunity. He went to the Palantir. He shrouded his chamber in spells of concealment, determined that his communications would not be intercepted by the prying minds of Gandalf or Galadriel. He reached out with his will, not to the mind of Sauron himself, that would be too dangerous, too open to domination, but to the command structure of Barad-dûr, to the Nazgûl, to the mouth of Sauron. He presented himself not as a rival, but as a humbled and loyal servant. The connection was established. The shadowy form of the Witch King, his power diminished but his malice intact, formed in the depths of the Seeing Stone. "Lord of Angmar," Saruman began, his voice a model of feigned humility. "I bring tidings and a warning. The power in Moria is greater than my spies first reported. It is a danger not just to my own designs, but to the grand strategy of the Master." The Witch King was silent, but Saruman could feel his cold, suspicious attention. "I have learned more of this Iron Lord," Saruman lied, weaving a tapestry of truth and calculated fiction. "He is a sorcerer of a strange and terrible new order. He seeks the ring, not to serve the Master, but to claim its power for himself. He boasts that he will build a new empire, and that the Lord of the Black Land will be his first conquest." This, Saruman knew, would be reported directly to Sauron. It would stoke the fires of the Dark Lord's paranoia and rage. "His strength is not in sorcery alone," Saruman continued, now offering genuine, valuable intelligence. "It is in his mind. He has turned the goblins not into a horde, but into a disciplined legion. He has relit the forges, and is arming them with superior plate and steel. His fortress is a factory, and his power is that of the machine. He is a threat of industry and cold logic, not of chaotic magic." He painted a picture of Vader as a rival ideologue, a being whose vision of absolute, mechanical order was a direct threat to Sauron's own vision of a world dominated by his singular, malevolent will. "I have resources," Saruman concluded, making his offer. "I have spies throughout Rohan and the northern lands. My Krebin can watch the passes. My knowledge of the region is second to none. I can be the Master's eyes and ears in the west. I can provide intelligence on the movements of the elves, on the mustering of the dwarves, and on the defenses of this Iron Lord. Let me prove my loyalty. Let me aid in the downfall of this mutual enemy." It was a masterful gambit. He positioned himself as an invaluable if humbled subordinate to Sauron. He gave Sauron a reason to focus his military might not on Rohan, but on the more immediate and ideologically threatening power of Moria. He was attempting to start a war between the two Dark Lords, a war that would bleed them both, leaving the board clear for his own future moves. In Mordor, Sauron received the intelligence. He saw through Saruman's pathetic ambition, but the information itself was too valuable to ignore. A sorcerer who valued industry and logic, a rival who sought the ring to build his own empire. Saruman's report confirmed Sauron's own worst fears about the new power in Moria. The unexpected treacherous alliance was formed. The two white wizards, one fallen to shadow and the other returned from it, were now locked in a silent, secret war of their own, a war of information and manipulation, with the fate of the two great dark powers hanging in the balance. While the powers of shadow plotted and schemed, a new force of light was moving through the world. Gandalf the White, returned from death and clad in new radiant power, was a being of singular, urgent purpose. The War of the Ring was his primary concern, but the anomaly of the Iron Lord of Moria was a riddle of cosmic importance that he could not ignore. He had met with the remnants of Borin's company, had seen the grim, shocked faces of the dwarves, and had heard the tale of their defeat. He had listened to their descriptions of the black-armored goblins, the shield walls, the crossbows, the cold, inhuman tactics. This was not the work of some new orc chieftain. This was the work of a mind utterly alien to Middle-earth. He rode to the borders of Lothlorien and spoke with Galadriel under the golden leaves. She told him of her contact with Vader's mind, of the visions of another universe, of his pain, and of his unbending tyrannical will. She confirmed Gandalf's deepest suspicions. Vader was not a creature of Arda. He was an outsider, a being from beyond the circles of the world, subject to different laws, driven by a different history. He is a greater threat than you know, Mithrandir, Galadriel had warned, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful light. Sauron seeks to dominate this world. This Vader seeks to remake it in the image of his own broken soul. His darkness is one of cold, empty order, and in some ways that is even more terrifying than the fire of Mordor. Gandalf knew he had to face this being himself. To send armies against Moria, as the dwarves had done, was to play the Iron Lord's game. To ignore him was to allow a second shadow to grow unchecked in the heart of the world. He had to understand. He had to look this new darkness in the face and measure its intent. He did not gather a host. He did not seek the aid of the elves or the council of Elrond. He rode alone. Shadowfax, the lord of all horses, a creature of light and wind, carried him swiftly from the golden wood, his white robes a brilliant beacon against the rugged, darkening lands. He did not ride like a king going to war, but like a storm front making its way to the mountains. He arrived at the east gate of Moria, the site of the dwarves' recent bloody defeat. The bodies had been cleared, but the stone of the causeway was still stained black with blood. The black-armored storm goblins stood their silent, disciplined watch on the walls. Gandalf did not stop. He rode Shadowfax directly onto the causeway, his presence a sudden, startling intrusion of pure white light into the grim, dark landscape. The goblins on the walls stirred, their pikes leveling, their crossbows raised. "Hold!" a guttural voice screeched from the battlements. It was Gothmog. He had been given his orders. The wizard was to be expected. Gandalf reined in Shadowfax before the closed gates. He sat tall and straight, his white staff held in his hand, his gaze fixed on the dark, iron-bound stone. He did not shout a challenge or make a threat. "I am Gandalf," his voice rang out clear and powerful, a sound of pure reason and authority that seemed to cut through the oppressive silence. "I have returned. I would speak with the new lord of this mountain." He announced himself not as Gandalf the Grey, the Wanderer, but as Gandalf, the one who was. He was a pillar of the world's ancient order, and he was demanding a parley with the being who sought to impose a new one. From deep within the mountain, Darth Vader felt the wizard's arrival. It was a searing point of light on the edge of his senses, a familiar, defiant energy. He had felt this power before, in the valley near Rivendell. This wizard was a being of consequence. He was the only one in this world, besides the Lady of the Wood, who seemed to operate on a level that was worth Vader's personal attention. He considered his options. He could ignore the wizard, an act of contempt. He could have his legions fire upon him, an act of war. Or he could meet him. He could measure this wizard's power and purpose directly, without the distraction of the ring-bearer. He chose the latter. This Gandalf was a key player in the world's power structure. It was time he understood the new rules of the game. The great gates of Moria groaned open once more, but this time, no army marched out. The way was left open, an invitation into the dark, fiery heart of the mountain. But Gandalf did not enter. Instead, from the darkness, a single towering figure emerged. Darth Vader, his black armor a perfect void against the torchlight, his lightsaber unlit at his belt, strode onto the causeway to meet the White Rider. The Wizard of the Secret Fire was about to confront the Dark Lord of the Sith. The two figures faced each other on the blood-stained causeway before the gates of Moria. It was a confrontation of absolute, elemental opposites. Gandalf the White, radiating a gentle but immensely powerful light, was the embodiment of hope, of free will, of the world's natural, chaotic, beautiful order. Darth Vader, a black hole of presence that seemed to drink the very light from the air, was the personification of control, of strength, of a new imposed order forged in fire and iron. Shadowfax stood his ground, but the great horse was uneasy, his breath misting in the sudden unnatural chill that emanated from the Dark Lord. "You have made this place your own," Gandalf began, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of immense power. "You have silenced Durin's Bane, a feat for which the free peoples would have named you a hero, yet you have replaced one darkness with another. I have replaced chaos with order." Vader's amplified voice boomed, the words flat and devoid of emotion. "The creature you call Durin's Bane was a mindless beast. It ruled through fear alone. I rule through purpose." "The purpose of a tyrant," Gandalf countered, his gaze unwavering. "You have enslaved the creatures of this mountain. You turn its heart into a weapon factory. You bleed your filth into the air and water. This is not order. It is a violation." "The weak must be guided by the strong," Vader stated, the words a core tenet of the Sith creed. The foolish must be given purpose by the wise. The creatures of this mountain now serve a will greater than their own petty squabbles. They are being made useful. It is a kindness they are too primitive to understand. Gandalf shook his head slowly, a look of profound, sorrowful disagreement on his ancient face. There is no kindness in chains, no matter how gilded. You speak of purpose, but what is your ultimate goal? What is it you seek in this world that is not your own? The same thing your enemy Sauron seeks, Vader replied without hesitation. The One Ring. The admission was stark, bold, and utterly without shame. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. You know of the ring, then you must know of its nature. It is a thing of pure evil, of absolute corruption. It cannot be wielded by any, save Sauron himself. It will twist and destroy anyone who tries to claim it. I have heard the arguments of your allies, Vader said, a hint of contempt in his mechanical tone. Their fear of the ring is a weakness. They seek to destroy a weapon of ultimate power because they lack the strength of will to control it. The ring is a tool, and like any tool, it is only as good or as evil as the hand that wields it. That is the lie that has snared the hearts of the proud for ages. Gandalf retorted, his voice rising, his staff beginning to glow with a soft white light. The ring has a will of its own. It has but one master. It will betray all others. It will not betray me, Vader stated, the certainty in his voice as absolute as the mountain around them. Its will is the will to dominate, to control, to impose order. Its will and my will are the same. When I have it, I will be its master, not its servant. With its power I will do what your enemy Sauron is too weak and too cowardly to do. I will not merely conquer this world, I will save it. Save it? Gandalf asked, his voice a whisper of disbelief. This world is in chaos, Vader explained, his words painting a grim, but not entirely inaccurate picture. The elves fade, the dwarves hide in their mountains. The kingdoms of men are fractured and decaying, living in the shadow of a glory they can no longer reclaim. You do not fight a war. You manage a slow, inevitable decline. I will end it. I will unite all the races under a single, ironclad rule of law. There will be no more war, no more division. There will be only peace, an enforced peace. Gandalf stared at the Dark Lord, and for the first time he fully understood the nature of Vader's darkness. It was not the nihilistic, corrupting evil of Sauron which sought to dominate and then consume. It was a cold, pragmatic, and in its own twisted way, utopian darkness. It was the darkness of the surgeon who is willing to kill the patient to cure the disease. The peace you offer is the peace of a prison, Gandalf said finally, his voice heavy. Free will, the right to choose one's own path, even if it leads to ruin, is the gift of the One. It cannot be taken away, not even for the promise of security. Free will is an illusion granted to children, Vader countered. True freedom is found in order, in purpose, in serving a system that is greater than oneself. The ideological chasm between them was absolute. They were two sides of the same coin, two immense powers who both sought to save the world, but whose definitions of salvation were irreconcilable. Then you are my enemy, Gandalf stated, his voice now filled with a cold, hard finality. As surely as Sauron. I am not your enemy, wizard, Vader replied. I am your replacement. Your age of hope, of heroes, of free will, it is ending. My age of order, of strength, of purpose, is just beginning. He turned his back on Gandalf and strode back towards the gates of Moria, the conversation over. He had not learned anything new, but he had confirmed what he suspected. The wizard, for all his power, was a sentimentalist, a guardian of a broken, decaying system. He was an obstacle, but he was an obstacle of the past. Gandalf watched him go, a deep sorrow in his heart. He had looked into the face of a new kind of shadow, and had found not a monster to be slain, but a philosophy to be defeated. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that defeating a philosophy was a far more difficult task. Thane Borin and the survivors of the Iron Hills expedition made a grim, fortified camp in the lower reaches of the Dimril Dale. They were a proud people, and the defeat at the gates of their own home was a wound that cut deeper than any goblin blade. Their initial impulse was to send for reinforcements, to return with the full might of King Daeon's army and lay a proper dwarven siege to the mountain. But their rage was tempered by a hard-won, bloody pragmatism. They had lost 100 of their finest warriors in a matter of minutes, their charge broken against a wall of discipline they had never expected. To simply throw more dwarves into that meat grinder would be an act of folly, not of courage. Their council of war was a grim, somber affair, held around a low campfire, their bearded faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "He fights with a cunning we did not anticipate," Borin growled, slamming a gauntleted fist on the rock beside him. "He turned our own tactics against us. A shield wall, pikes, crossbows. It is as if he read a book on dwarven warfare and taught it to rats." "It is not just his tactics," another captain added. "It is his soldiers. I have fought goblins my entire life. They are cowardly, chaotic things. These were different. They stood their ground. They held the line. They were terrified. Yes, I saw it in the eyes of the one I cut down. But their fear of the one who commands them is greater than their fear of us. That is a powerful weapon." They were at an impasse. They could not retreat in shame, but they could not see a path to victory. It was into this council of despair that a new figure arrived. Gandalf the White, riding Shadowfax, seemed to emerge from the twilight itself, his presence a sudden calming balm on their fiery, frustrated spirits. He dismounted and approached their fire. "Thane Borin," he said, his voice grave, "I have seen the face of your new enemy." The dwarves fell silent, their respect for the White Wizard absolute. They listened as Gandalf recounted his meeting with the Iron Lord. He did not speak of other worlds or strange technologies. He framed it in terms they would understand. "He is a sorcerer of a new and terrible kind," Gandalf explained. "His power is not of fire and shadow, but of cold iron and unbending will. He is a master of tactics and a forger of armies. You are right, a frontal assault on Moria now is suicide. He has turned the mountain into a fortress that even your ancestors would find difficult to breach." Borin's face was grim. "Then what are we to do, Master Wizard? Are we to abandon Khazad-dûm to this pretender?" "No," Gandalf said, his eyes seeming to glow in the firelight. "We will not abandon it, and we will not assault it. If a wolf has made its den in the mountain, you do not charge foolishly into its cave. You surround it, you watch it, you starve it." A new strategy began to form, born of Gandalf's wisdom and the dwarves' legendary endurance and skill in stonework. Their mission had changed. It was no longer a war of reclamation. It was a war of containment. "You are the children of Durin," Gandalf said, his voice ringing with a new purpose. "The mountains are your allies as much as they are his fortress. You will not win this battle with a single glorious charge. You will win it with stone, with patience, and with vigilance." He laid out the plan. The 500 warriors of the Iron Hills were no longer an assault force. They were the foundation of a great wall. They would not attack the East Gate again. Instead, they would begin the long, arduous task of sealing the passes, of building new fortifications, of turning the entire region around Moria into a cage. Messengers were dispatched to King Dain, not asking for an army, but for masons, engineers, and supplies. The dwarves, their hearts filled with a new grim purpose, set to work. They were masters of stone and siegecraft, and now they turned those skills from offense to defense. They began to build a series of watchtowers in the high passes, mirroring the ones the goblins were building below. They felled trees and created blockades in the narrow valleys. They established a permanent, fortified camp in the Dimril Dale, a new fortress of their own from which they could watch the East Gate day and night. Their goal was to trap the Iron Lord and his new army within the mountain. If he could not march his legions out, he could not project his power across Middle-earth. It was a slow, grinding, and unglorious task, a war of patience that could last for years, even decades. But it was a task perfectly suited to the stubborn, unyielding nature of the dwarves. Borin stood on the beginnings of a new stone wall, looking across the valley at the silent, smoking mountain. He had traded his axe for a stonemason's hammer, but his war had not ended. It had simply changed. The loud, hot war of battle was over. The long, cold war of containment had just begun. Sauron was displeased. The report from his emissary, the mouth of Sauron, had been delivered with a trembling, uncharacteristic fear that the Dark Lord found both insulting and deeply informative. The new power in Moria had not just rejected his generous offer. It had dismissed him, mocked him, and issued a direct threat against the throne of Mordor itself. "I will come for him. I will tear down his black tower, and I will extinguish his fiery eye." The sheer blasphemous arrogance of it was breathtaking. Sauron, who had contended with the might of the Elven kings and the pride of Númenor, had never been so directly and contemptuously challenged by a being of darkness. Compounding this insult was the intelligence now being fed to him by his new sycophantic ally, Saruman. The wizard's reports from the Palantir confirmed the speed at which the Iron Lord was consolidating his power. An army of disciplined, armored goblins, forges burning day and night, a tactical mind that had handed a bloody defeat to the legendary warriors of the dwarves. Sauron saw the threat with perfect clarity. This was not a minor warlord. This was a true rival, a third power that was rising in a key strategic location, threatening to split his focus and disrupt his grand, multi-generational plan for the conquest of Middle-earth. The Iron Lord had to be dealt with. A full-scale assault was still premature. His main armies were massing for the war against Gondor. The ring was still in play. To divert his primary strength to the north to deal with this upstart would be to show his hand too early. But a test of arms was required, a demonstration of power. He needed to bloody this Iron Lord's nose, to test the strength of his new legions, and to remind this pretender of the true source of darkness in the world. He would send a message, written in the blood of his own expendable servants. His gaze turned to the fortress of Dol Guldur and southern Mirkwood. It was his forward base in the north, a festering heart of evil that projected his power across the lands of the elves and the Wilderland. An army was already massing there, preparing for the assault on Lothlorien. He would divert a portion of it. His will, a silent, irresistible command, surged across the dead marshes and into the dark fortress. He summoned one of his 9 servants, a Nazgul of lesser rank than the Witch King, but still a being of immense terror and power. He gave it its new command. It would take a legion, 10,000 of the savage, battle-hardened orcs of Dol Guldur. It would take the great, lumbering mountain trolls, bred for breaking gates and shattering shield walls. It would take fell beasts, the swarming giant bats and other creatures of nightmare that haunted the dark woods. Their target was not the Golden Wood. Their target was the East Gate of Moria. Their mission was simple and brutal. Assault the mountain, test its defenses, break the new goblin army, and, if possible, slay the Iron Lord himself. Sauron cared little for the fate of the orcs. They were a renewable resource, a tide of flesh and hate to be thrown against the enemy's walls. Their purpose was to reveal the Iron Lord's strength, his tactics, his weaknesses, for their master's future consideration. The army of Dol Guldur marched. It was not a disciplined, silent force like the Uruk-hai of Isengard. It was a chaotic, gibbering, screeching horde, a river of filth and savagery that flowed out of Mirkwood, across the plains, and towards the misty mountains. They were the old darkness, the raw, chaotic evil of the First Age, and they were about to crash against the new, cold, industrial darkness of a different universe. Sauron watched their progress with his great eye, a dispassionate, analytical gaze. He would see what this Vader was truly made of. He would see if the Iron Lord's fortress of cold logic could withstand the sheer, overwhelming force of pure, mindless hate. The first battle in the War of the Two Shadows was about to begin. The first warning of the approaching army came not from a scout's horn, but from a cold, analytical voice in Darth Vader's helmet. Massive biological force detected approaching from the east, Cortana stated, her tone calm but the data she was presenting anything but. Approximately 10,000 hostile signatures. Composition includes a mix of the goblin-type creatures we've encountered, and several larger life forms with significant biomass, trolls, based on the local lexicon. They are disorganized, but moving with a singular purpose. This is a full-scale assault, Chief. Vader stood on the battlements above the East Gate, the same position from which he had watched the defeat of the dwarves. He looked out into the valley, and he saw the army of Dol Guldur. It was a black, seething tide of bodies, a chaotic mass of screeching, snarling creatures that made his own disciplined legions look like paragons of civilization. He felt the oppressive aura of malice that washed before them, the psychic spoor of their leader, a Nazgul, another of Sauron's wraiths. This was the test. Sauron's response to his rejection. It was crude, predictable, and utterly artless, a simple, brute force assault. Gothmog, Vader's voice boomed, and his goblin lieutenant scrambled to his side, his face pale with a fear that was now a permanent feature. "My lord," the goblin rasped. "The enemy approaches," Vader stated. "They believe they can win with numbers and savagery. They will be taught the meaning of discipline. Deploy the legions, first and second cohorts to the gate, third cohort, crossbows to the battlements, hold the fourth in reserve in the main hall. No one breaks ranks, no one retreats. The price for cowardice is a death more painful than any orc can deliver. Make them understand." Gothmog shrieked the orders, and the heart of the mountain came to life. Horns blew, not with the noble sound of Rohan, but with harsh, ugly blasts. The rhythmic tramp of thousands of iron-shod boots echoed from the stone as the storm goblins marched to their positions. They formed their shield walls, leveled their pikes, and manned the battlements with a silent, terrified efficiency. The factory had produced an army, and now that army was about to be tested. The army of Dol Guldur did not wait for siege engines or a subtle plan. They simply charged. A wave of 10,000 screaming, frothing orcs, their rusted scimitars held high, surged towards the causeway, a tide of pure, mindless hate. They hit the storm goblin shield wall with the force of a tidal wave. The battle that followed was a study in contrasts. The Mordor orcs fought as individuals, a swirling, chaotic mass of claws and teeth and rusty blades. They were savage, ferocious, and utterly undisciplined. Vader's goblins fought as a single organism. They did not duel. They did not roar challenges. They held their shields, absorbed the charge, and let their pikes do the work. The front rank was a passive wall. The second and third ranks were a machine of death, their pikes jabbing and retracting in a steady, grim rhythm, turning the space before the shield wall into a kill zone. From the battlements above, the crossbow cohorts fired disciplined, coordinated volleys. They did not aim for individual targets. They fired into the dense press of the enemy ranks, their iron-tipped bolts raining down, causing chaos and thinning the enemy's numbers before they even reached the gate. But the sheer overwhelming numbers of the Mordor army were a weapon in themselves. They climbed over the bodies of their own dead, a rising tide of corpses that threatened to swamp the defenders. Great mountain trolls, their hides as thick as stone, lumbered through the orc ranks. They swung massive clubs and iron hammers, shattering the goblin shields and creating temporary breaches in the line, only to be met by a concentrated forest of pike thrusts to their unarmored legs and bellies. Vader stood on the ramparts, a silent, black puppet master directing the entire defense. He did not join the fray. His presence alone was enough, a terrifying, silent threat that ensured his own troops fought with a desperation born of absolute fear. He observed the battle with a cold, dispassionate eye, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's chaotic assault, directing his reserves to plug gaps, his mind a battlefield computer processing the ebb and flow of the slaughter below. He used the force sparingly, but with devastating effect. When a troll broke through the line and threatened to shatter the entire formation, Vader simply raised a hand, and the creature's immense club was torn from its grasp and sent flying. When a group of orcs began to scale the rock face beside the gate, he reached out, and a shower of loose rock and stone was telekinetically dislodged from the cliff, crushing the climbers in a miniature landslide. The battle raged for hours, a relentless, grinding affair. The causeway before the gate became a charnel house, a mountain of black-blooded orc corpses piled against the unyielding wall of goblin shields. The army of Dol Guldur, for all its savagery and numbers, could not break the disciplined, fear-driven line. Their chaotic rage was being systematically, bloodily, and efficiently dismantled by cold, brutal logic. Sauron's message of hate was being answered by Vader's sermon of order. The Nazgul watched the unfolding disaster from the back of its fell beast, circling high above the slaughter. The legion it commanded was being annihilated, its chaotic fury breaking uselessly against the disciplined, black iron formations of this new, baffling enemy. The tide of orcs was ebbing, their mindless courage finally failing in the face of such efficient, systematic death. This was not a glorious battle for the glory of the Dark Lord. It was a butchering. Rage, cold and absolute, filled the wraith's spectral being. Its master had sent it here to test this Iron Lord, and it was failing. It could not return to the Black Land with a report of such a humiliating defeat. The only option left was a direct confrontation. It would challenge the master of this mountain himself and claim his skull for the glory of Sauron. The fell beast let out a soul-rending shriek and dove from the sky, its leathery wings carrying it towards the battlements of the East Gate. It landed on the wide causeway, a creature of ancient nightmare, its serpentine neck hissing at the ranks of terrified storm goblins. The Nazgul, a figure of flowing black robes and ethereal menace, dismounted. It drew its long, pale Morgul blade, and its ghostly voice, a whisper of the grave, echoed across the field, a challenge aimed not at the goblins, but at the silent black figure who stood on the ramparts above. "Lord of this hovel," the wraith hissed, "you hide behind your wall of slaves. Face a true servant of the one true master. Face the wrath of Sauron." Vader looked down from the battlements. He had been waiting for this. The foot soldiers were a distraction. This was the true commander, the nexus of the enemy's will. He did not reply with words. He simply leaped. He jumped from the 50-foot-high rampart, his black cape billowing behind him like the wings of a dark angel. He used the force to cushion his descent, landing on the causeway before the Nazgul with a heavy, solid impact that cracked the stone. The storm goblins parted before him, a silent, fearful wave. The battle around them seemed to fade into the background, the world narrowing to the two dark champions who now faced each other on the bridge of death. The Nazgul raised its blade, its aura of terror washing over Vader, a wave of despair designed to freeze the hearts of men. Vader met it with the cold, bottomless void of the dark side, his own presence so utterly devoid of hope and light that the Nazgul's aura simply dissipated against it. "I have faced your kind before," Vader's voice boomed. "You were found wanting." He ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade sprang to life with its iconic snap hiss, its blood-red glow painting the Nazgul's black robes in sinister highlights. The Wraith charged, its blade a blur of ghostly light, striking not for Vader's armor, but for his soul. Vader met the charge with a calm, brutal efficiency. Their blades clashed, a screech of tortured magic against focused plasma. This Nazgul was a powerful warrior, but Vader had already fought and defeated its master, the Witch King. He knew their tactics, he knew their weaknesses, he had learned. He parried the Morgul blade with his lightsaber and simultaneously lashed out with his free hand. He did not try to choke the Wraith's physical form. He reached out with the force and seized the spirit within, the tormented, enslaved soul that gave the creature its power. The Nazgul shrieked, a sound of pure, spiritual agony. It had never felt a power like this. It was not the light of the elves which sought to banish it. It was a cold, cruel, crushing power that sought to dominate it, to unmake it, to dissect it. Vader tightened his force grip, and the Nazgul's physical form flickered, its robes and armor becoming translucent. He was not just holding it, he was actively attacking its connection to the physical world, pouring his own cold rage and disciplined hate directly into its spectral essence. He was torturing its very soul. "Your master's power is a pale shadow of true darkness," Vader snarled, pressing his attack. His lightsaber disarmed the Wraith, sending the Morgul blade skittering across the stone. The Nazgul, now weaponless and in the grip of an agony it had not felt in thousands of years, knew only one thing: escape. It had to flee. It had to report this new horrifying power to its master. With a final, desperate surge of will, it tore its spirit free from Vader's grip, a process that felt like ripping its own skin from its bones. It abandoned its physical form, its fell beast, its army. Its body collapsed into a pile of empty black robes, and its spirit fled, a thin, terrified wail that shot back towards the east, back towards the relative safety of Mordor. It did not flee as a proud servant returning to report. It fled as a terrified victim, its very essence scarred by a darkness colder and more profound than its own. Vader stood over the empty robes, his lightsaber humming. He deactivated it and turned to the last, terrified remnants of the Orc army. His message had been sent. The flight of the Nazgul was the final, breaking straw for the army of Dol Guldur. Their commander, the focal point of Sauron's will that had driven them forward, was gone. Their ranks were shattered. Before them stood an unbreakable shield wall of black-armored goblins, and in front of that wall stood their silent, terrifying lord, a being who had just unmade a ringwraith with what looked like contemptuous ease. Their savage, mindless fury collapsed into an equally mindless, savage panic. They broke. They threw down their weapons and they fled, a chaotic, screaming rout. Vader did not allow them to escape. "No prisoners," his amplified voice commanded, a sentence of death for the 10,000. He gave the order, and his storm goblins, for the first time, advanced. They broke their defensive shield wall and formed disciplined, aggressive cohorts. They marched forward with a steady, rhythmic tramp, their pikes lowered, their swords drawn. They were no longer a defensive line. They were an execution squad. They drove the fleeing orcs from the valley, cutting them down from behind with a cold, ruthless efficiency. The orcs, who had lived their lives as predators, now died as prey, their disorganized flight no match for the disciplined, coordinated pursuit of Vader's legions. The battle turned into a slaughter, and by the time the sun set, the Dimril Dale was silent once more, choked with the bodies of Sauron's army. Vader had won. It was not just a victory, it was an annihilation. He had faced a direct military assault from Mordor, and had crushed it utterly. He had cemented his rule over Moria, and had proven that his new army, his new philosophy of war, was superior to the chaotic hordes of the old dark powers. The consequences of this victory rippled across Middle-earth, shifting the balance of power in profound and terrifying ways. In Mordor, Sauron felt the psychic death scream of his legion. He felt the pure, unadulterated terror of his Nazgul servant as its spirit limped back to the Black Land, its essence scarred and diminished. He finally truly understood. This was no minor warlord. This was no upstart pretender. This was a true rival. A third Dark Lord had risen, and his power was not of this world. The war for the ring was no longer a simple two-sided conflict. The board was now triangular, and infinitely more dangerous. Sauron's gaze, which had been fixed on Gondor and the movements of the ring-bearer, was now irrevocably split, one half always watching the smoldering, defiant peaks of the misty mountains. In the mountains to the east, Thane Borin and his dwarves witnessed the aftermath of the battle from their high watchtowers. They saw the sheer, impossible scale of the victory. They had been defeated by 500 of the Iron Lord's soldiers. The Iron Lord had just destroyed 10,000 of Mordor's. A grim, sobering realization dawned on them. Their plan of containment was a fool's hope. They were not trapping a wolf in its den. They were standing guard outside a dragon's lair. Their mission was no longer about reclamation or even containment. It was about survival. In Lothlorien, Galadriel felt the shockwave of the Nazgul's spiritual agony. She felt the sudden, brutal silencing of 10,000 dark souls. The victory brought her no relief, only a deeper dread. The Iron Lord had just done what the combined might of her own people would have struggled to achieve. He had positioned himself as an enemy of Sauron. Yes, but a fire that consumes another fire is still a fire, and it was burning on her doorstep. The War of the Ring was irrevocably fractured. The simple path of the Fellowship, the desperate quest of Frodo and Sam to carry the ring to Mordor, was now infinitely more complex. They were no longer just sneaking past the eye of one enemy. They were now walking a razor's edge between two great warring shadows. They were trapped between the all-seeing eye of Sauron and the unbending iron fist of Darth Vader. The fate of Middle-earth no longer rested on a simple contest between light and dark, but on the outcome of a war between two vastly different but equally terrifying kinds of night.